A few months ago, I found myself thinking about a name that I had unconsciously lived under myself. One thing as I've gone through my life, I have struggled at times in my life with fear. And I heard myself one day as I spoke to someone say, fear is something that I struggle with. And I said it in such a way that I said fear as my identity. And I got home and I began to think about that. And I began to allow God to speak into my heart. And God said, you need to stop identifying with fear as your identity. You need to live under my new identity, under the freedom that I have given you. Does that mean I'll never struggle with that again? I don't think that's the way it'll work. But I do know that I need to live under a new identity in order to go forward into the future that God has for me. So as we receive our new name, as we embrace this tension of transformation, I wonder, how can we begin to grow in our faith? Well, here are 4 practical principles for growing in your faith that I believe we find revealed in the scriptures through the life of Peter. Number 1, you want to grow in your faith? Here's the principles from Peter. Number 1, drop everything and follow Jesus. When Peter made the decision to follow Jesus, he had to leave some things behind. He left behind his boat. He left behind his family. He left behind the village and the area that he knew was familiar. He left it behind to follow Jesus. God might not be asking you to relocate, although he may. You need to hear God's voice for that yourself. But I truly believe that if we're going to grow in our faith as we follow Jesus, we need to surrender everything. We need to drop everything and follow Jesus. That's hard because that means that there's some areas in my life that I've got to turn over to Jesus that I might have tried to hold back until now. And I truly believe this for somebody listening to my message today. There are some things in your past that you, like Peter, need to leave on the shore and never return to. Drop everything and follow Jesus. Number 2, you want to grow in your faith? Number 2, spend time with Jesus. Peter was one of Jesus' closest disciples. He's present at some of the most intimate moments in Jesus' ministry here on earth. And I want to say this, if you want to grow in your faith, there is no substitute for spending time with God. And that looks like for us our spiritual practices. That looks like us spending time in the Bible. That looks like us spending time praying and worshiping God. And that's why Peter himself could write in his first letter to the church in 1 Peter 2 verse 2, he wrote this, he said, like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up. Everybody say, grow up. You may grow up in your salvation. If you want to keep growing in your faith today, I want to encourage you to develop a craving for the presence and the word of God. Number 3, you want to grow in your faith? Step out. Step out. Peter, he steps out of the boat. He steps forward to preach on the day of Pentecost. And I believe that there is a space in your life where God is inviting you to trust him, to step forward in faith, to trust him even though you're not sure that you've got everything that it takes. You're not sure that you've got it all together, because if it's God's command, he's going to provide what you need to step forward. And God's inviting you to step out in faith. Maybe you need to step out and invite that friend to church. Maybe you need to step out and sign up for the C3 Academy next year. Maybe you need to step out and sign up for a C3 group today. Maybe God is inviting you to take a step of faith, and growing in our faith and following Christ will always involve steps of faith. So number 1, we're going to drop everything and follow Jesus. Number 2, we talked about how we need to spend time with Jesus. Number 3, we talked about stepping out. And then finally, number 4, we need to allow God to change our heart. To grow in your faith, I believe that there's some ways of thinking and some views of others where God desires to change your heart. Peter in Acts chapter 10, he has this vision. And God uses it to see if Peter was willing to allow him to change his heart. You can read that vision this week. See, Peter had this limited view at this point for the gospel. He saw it as primarily going to the Jews. But God, knew that Christ's salvation, Christ's work on the cross was for all humanity. And God is working on Peter's heart, and he touches Peter's heart through this vision, and Peter ends up taking this trip and preaching to a group of people that would never have otherwise heard him preach the gospel. And you know what? We too can get entrenched in ways of thinking that are not aligned with the heart of God. Even as Christians, we can begin to follow a cultural or a political view above a kingdom revelation. But if we want to grow in our faith, and if we need to allow God to change our heart so that it begins to better reflect the heart of Christ. I want to encourage you, I think Peter's a guy we need to give a call today. Because sometimes we need a reminder that it's both. And just like Peter, the rock, I believe that God is speaking something different over your life. Something new over your life. I believe that God is inviting us in the middle of our brokenness to not only experience his transforming power in our lives, but also to play our part in his mission right now. My time is gone and I'm finishing. But I always want to finish with giving you these two questions to reflect on as you go away from here. Number one, where is God inviting you to play your part? I firmly believe that Jesus Christ is the hope of the world. And I believe that Jesus' primary way of outworking his mission is through the local church. I believe that's why when we read in that passage about Peter, Jesus says of his church, he says, I will build my church and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And I want to ask you, where is God inviting you, even in the midst of your brokenness, to play your part right now? Maybe you've stood on the sideline for too long, putting some different excuses in the way. But I believe God right now is inviting you to play your part in his mission through the local church. Where is God inviting you to play your part? But number two, where is God inviting you to experience wholeness and transformation? Where is God inviting you to allow him in to touch and heal some areas of your life? And I pray as that we reflect on the life of Peter today, that we would allow God to bring that healing and transformation into our lives. But that equally, right now, we would also step forward and play our part in building his church. Because it's both. It's both. I'm going to hand you back to your locations. May God bless you.
If you enjoyed this video today, why don't you click subscribe and click on that notification bell to get a notification the next time we upload a video. And if you're new or you've been coming to the C3 Church for a little while now, why don't you find out what your next step might be in the journey of faith? Click on the next step link in the description below to find out what your next step in your journey might be.